Today we're taking a look at Susanoo builds and his general playstyle. Starting off with the starter items, then going into the normal builds and then some playstyle tricks that you can use. We will be going over both jungle as well as laning, usually solo lane or even mid lane maybe, and we'll start with that right now. If you're a jungle Susanoo, I highly recommend the Bombas Mask Red Pot start. Typically, this is all you will need. He has such high damage early on, especially with his one that basically has 2 damage swings, that you don't want to miss out on abusing that damage in early game as much as possible. Therefore, you should probably almost always go Red Pot. There are obviously some situations where it's a little more risky, against the Thor or Thanatos maybe, but still, you should be able to get kills early and the Red Pot should pay off most of the time. Otherwise, simply go boots and buy a few less pots. In any other lane, you want Blue Stone Pendant. The double proccing on his one plus his general reliance on abilities can really make this very potent on him compared to Death Toll, which relies more on auto attacks, and you're not going to do too many of those compared to your abilities. Along with that, you should usually get boots, because Red Pot relies on you getting kills early, which is often not the case in solo lane. If you're more experienced and you feel like you will easily be able to get a kill, for example against a squishy solo laner, then feel free to go Red Pot instead. Always get some potions along with it, green and blue in the jungle, and green and multi-potion in the solo lane. There are 3 items you should almost always be getting. Warrior Tabi, Jotun's Wrath, and later on Titan's Bane. Warrior Tabi and Jotun's Wrath should be the first 2 items you finish, unless you're matched against a heavy physical comp and you want to go Breastplate of Valor first. The point at which you're building Titan's Bane greatly depends on the amount of defense the enemy team is building at which point of the game. Why these 3 items? Susanoo is ability based. He will deal a lot of damage with Warrior Tabi, whereas Ninja Tabi gives him lackluster damage in comparison. There's no reason to trade it unless you're very, very far into the game and need some more attack speed because your ability damage is too low. Jotun's Wrath, because it's the perfect item for an ability based assassin. You get cooldown reduction, some extra mana for early lane or jungling, you get extra penetration, and you get that sweet power that you want. Titan's Bane, because it's the most viable option when it comes to getting quick penetration for abilities. There are other options like Stone Cutting Sword, but you need to auto the targets first. Susanoo usually doesn't auto the targets first before he goes in. He will try to get a lot of abilities off before he even gets close to the target, or potentially has the chance to box him right in the face, so you want that Titan's Bane. Now for the more complex choices. Susanoo has very high damage, high base damage, high scalings, and overall very good ability damage that he can apply easily to the enemy targets, but he's also squishy as hell. Now, you can easily go for a high penetration, high damage option and leave it at that. That's perfectly fine if you just want to burst and get out. The problem is, if you get locked down, you get shut down. So I would like to go beyond the basic thought of just building him full damage. If you look at his base numbers, he actually has higher base damage than Thanatos across his abilities, and nearly as much as Thor. If you remember that, they were both very prominent in the so-called dirty bubble meta, where assassins would play high defense builds with little damage and just a little bit of penetration in order to get more damage off in a longer period of time. In order to do so, you needed a character that has high base damage, so he can get off enough damage without building into it. Susanoo is a perfect example of this. At the same time, Susanoo has insane scalings. You won't be able to fit everything into one build, and the playstyle may differ from game to game. I'm just going to show you some options that might work for you. Number 1, full ability damage. Bloodforge is an excellent item for ability damage now because it has such high base numbers without the need to stack, and is overall very strong. I did not find it quite as impressive as I thought it would be initially, but it's still an amazing item for him. Brawler Speed Stick because it has power and penetration for you with no need to stack. Finishing off with a Hydra's Lament, maybe building this early on, just to get extra CDR and those amped up auto attacks with the attack cancel chain. I cannot recommend attack cancelling the new way as much as I thought I would, because the 1.25 damage extra isn't all too strong with Hydras. There are other options for this build, for example building Transcendence, but generally I find them inferior to this combination, because it provides you with a lot of utility and a lot of power in general. When it comes to defensive cooldown reduction items, there's a variety of items that are good for Susanoo. Bulwark of Hope if you just want that physical defense and the quick CDR. Genji's Guard if you want more utility against mages. I personally always prefer this. Halo Lord and Savior Genji. Spirit Rope as an addition to Genji's guard, or if you're facing mixed damage, and Mantle of Discord for the same reasons basically, if you want to be safer and you have the extra gold. There's another item that deserves to be mentioned when it comes to penetration, protection, and damage for Susanoo, and that's Void Shield. Void Shield provides you with an overall mix of nice stats, helps your team as well, and is a pretty great item that has recently been picked up a lot. I think it's especially great for Susanoo, simply because he can't make as much use of Stone Cutting Sword, so this will provide him with the physical defense he needs, while still giving him the pen for abilities without having the need to walk into the enemy, or especially save abilities that he would otherwise use beforehand. Another item that deserves to be mentioned is Winged Blade, simply because it gives you so much for such a cheap price, and it even gives you some extra movement speed, which is really fun for a character that's already that fast. There's also the option of going triple crit. The first item you would build in that case is Wind Demon, simply because it's the cheapest out of the three, and it provides you with a lot more than the others in earlier stages, then Malice and then Deathbringer. This is a very, very risky option, as you will get shot down very easily if you're ever out of position, but at the same time, it's the only way that crit really works on him, because you have enough of a chance to get a crit just by engaging and hitting 1 or 2 hits. Otherwise, you won't be able to crit reliably, and that's something that is problematic because then crit is worth less than it would be otherwise. Susanoo doesn't have the time to punch an enemy a few times before going out, especially not in later stages of the game where you can build crit. So, it's triple crit or nothing. I tried triple crit, I didn't like it too much. The good thing about it is it still gives you a lot of power, so your abilities are very strong still. But overall, I felt that some defense on him does a lot more for you than crit can. Stay away from Rage because it gives you less power than the others and you're not going to auto that much for it to be effective. Last but not least, consider Hide of the Urchin. It's usually a little weird on assassins, but some can make use of it, and Susanoo is definitely one of them. You easily get the kill stacks early on, and you need some defense items to be effective, and this can allow you to just go for a single defense item and then switch back to offense without being too squishy. A few words on the abilities. Stormcutter is your bread and butter skill. Maximize it first, maybe even skip a point, I forgot to do that, sorry about that, and just make sure to max it and use it as much as possible. It is your in and out skill, you can deal a lot of damage with it and get out of sticky situations quickly. There's no reason not to level it. It has the highest damage. Nothing speaks against leveling it. It has the lower cooldown with the leveling. Just do it! After that, things become more interesting. You would think that leveling his ultimate second makes sense given that it has a lot of damage and a lot of control. But this only makes sense if you're going for a lot of team fights early. Otherwise, you're much better off maximizing Jetstream. Due to having 4 ticks, Jetstream has nearly as much damage as the ultimate, only 55 less, and nearly as much scaling, just 20% less. So if you let this tick long enough, it deals a lot of damage. Also, be aware that you don't need to teleport immediately. If you hit Jetstream on a target, you're probably better off waiting a little bit until the ticks run down and then teleport to the target. Not only gives us a moment of surprise, but also more damage from the Jetstream ticks. On top of that, maxing this ability earlier gives you shorter cooldown on it, allowing you to move around a lot more. Afterwards, max your ultimate, Typhoon. It still has a lot of damage increase from maxing it, and it costs only a little more mana, so it's worth it, simply because in team fights this has a huge impact. Wind Siphon is really not an ability that should ever be leveled before anything else. The only thing that you get from leveling it is slightly lower mana cost and some more base damage. The base damage is pretty much laughable. It's 15 base damage per rank, so putting points into that is a complete waste as it doesn't lower the cooldown either. Also, thank you to Lumi for pointing this out before he made the video. Last but not least, a few words on combat situations. Generally, you can throw your Jetstream on enemy targets without having to engage. The dot deals a lot of damage and you don't have to feel bad about using it. The cooldown is relatively low as long as you hit someone. Your engages should be done with a 3 though. Only do engage when your 1 Stormcutter is up, because otherwise you're not going to deal too much damage. Wind Siphon on its own has very low damage, and Typhoon is very nice, but it's more of a control ability, and unless the target is already low, it's not going to kill someone off. Stormcutter is what you need at all times. You hit the enemy twice, then you reposition yourself in the direction you're facing, and you can always consider to throw auto attacks in between just to get some more damage off, but you don't really need to. Susanoo has so much ability damage and scaling right now, which I assume will be nerfed, that auto attacks aren't all that necessary because you can just spam your abilities over and over until the enemy is dead. Later stages of the game, this will not work and you will obviously need some autos in there, which is why I prefer some defense on him, because he can control a team pretty well. He can juke around a team fight and he has to be shut down because otherwise his damage becomes too much for the squishies. So if the enemy team focuses its attention on you, just try to juke them, try to throw your 3 between them and teleport at unexpected moments, use the dash on your 1, and if you're in trouble, just ult to be safe. This works so well at the moment that it's really hard to shut a Susanoo down if he has some defense and some options to get out. In that sense, I prefer cooldown reduction builds and defense builds, but it's obviously your choice. This is all I will say for now. I will try out this god a little more and see if I can come up with some new conclusions, but I think generally this captures the god pretty well. The builds have been working out pretty well for me so far, so I will see if I actually need to change anything. Thank you guys for watching. Dukesloth out.